This episode of the Wattpad Tea is sponsored by Pacho's Get Out Quick Plan. Have you recently murdered someone? Someone who you will surely end up being convicted of their murder? Perhaps a certain co-writer that drives you nuts? Well, fear no more! Pacho's Get Out Quick Plan is an easy way to get out of the country. All you need is 2 fake passports, burner phones, and a guy named Pacho. Don't get the guy named Randolph, he's not trustworthy. Pacho's Get Out Quick Plan only costs 2,100,000 talas, but listeners of the Wattpad Tea can get Pacho's Get Out Quick Plan for 20% off. Go to pachoescapesthecountry.com. That's PACHO escapesthecountry.com. Enter code 1DGMRDR. Again, that's code 1DGMRDR. What a deal! For more information, call 1-800-GET-PACHO. Hey listeners, I'm Sunaina Kabadkar, and this is the Wattpad Tea podcast. Today I'm going to take you through the book Mr. Right, written by Joy Jenkins, fondly known as Joy Moment on Wattpad. For those of you who have not read Mr. Right, what are you doing? This episode contains spoilers, so listen at your own risk. And of course, to those who disregard my warning and are not familiar with Mr. Right, let me give you some background. Taken straight from Mr. Right's book description, is it better to write well or to be well known? This book circles around Elliot Mackenzie, a prolific young adult writer who decides, after publishing 4 books, that she needs a change. For her 5th novel, she decides to use 2 points of view, 1 female and 1 male. And since everyone knows males think differently than females, she needs a co-author. Well, she finds her co-author in Beck Daniels, who happens to have the perfect personality to combat Elliot's, or at least survive Elliot's. They begin their co-authorship together on very loose, not at all stable enough to hold a flamingo up ground, as Beck challenges Elliot's style of writing that is formulaic and cliched. And Elliot returns the favor by calling Beck's tendencies to self-sabotage and procrastinate. It's not looking good, folks. As they continue their partnership, they warm up to each other. Meanwhile, Elliot's got more than just a new book on the brain, as her sister's dreaded wedding comes closer and closer. Apparently, there's the crazy side of the family and the other side of the family, and you can guess which side her sister is on. Anyway, as time passes and the book is written, she finds herself upset with her writing. Yes, it is formulaic, and yes, cliché, but isn't that what she wants to do? Is Beck right about saying that she needs to stop? Well, I guess he is, because she scraps what she's writing and starts all over again. This time around, both Beck and Elliot are happy with the story, and he even admits to wanting to finally put his name on the book. He didn't want to before because he didn't like how she wrote it before. Things are looking up. Elliot is finally overcoming fear, and Beck is too, admitting to his family he's writing a book. I mean, even Elliot's crazy sister Cece, who is a writer as well, has finally gotten together with Elliot's best friend Milo. Then Elliot has to, air quotes, ruin it by letting her original murderous intent for Beck, that was now friendship, turn into the feels. I mean, everyone saw it coming except for her. Even Cece and Milo. She asks Beck to go with her to her sister's wedding. Of course, being the awkward people in love that they are, Beck says no and causes her emotional heartache. Jump to the hell that is the wedding for Elliot, with her sharp-tongued brothers who don't think their sister's jobs as writers are real jobs, and her father and his new wife making offers of money considering how his daughters are starving artists. She needs saving. In rides her brother Tristan, with her knight in shining armor, Beck in very loud orange pants. Well, I'll say that it is less of a hell with Beck there. And the book ends with them ending up enjoying themselves, as well as the long-awaited kiss that comes when characters finally realize that there is no way that they're not ending up together. And of course, since Joy is a gem of an author, she lets us glimpse into Elliot's and Beck's future. In the epilogue, Beck has published his first book, The Next Great American Novel, which was probably written on his typewriter. Then we get a glimpse of Cece's and Milo's elopement, which was done very unsuccessfully by Cece, since if it had actually happened, Milo would not have been whole for his honeymoon. A gift of a dog to Milo from Cece went horribly wrong in the next chapter, and the last extra chapter we were given was of Elliot and Beck finally dropping anchor. Oh, sorry. Translation, getting married. Which almost ended in disaster due to both writers being unable to write their vows. Which, let's be honest, was the best way to send us off to new books, including a spin-off that Joy's writing about their children. Shh! You didn't hear from me. So now that you know what happens in Mr. Right, I think it's time to know the author. I've secretly been in contact by Homing Pigeon, and she's written me about herself. Shh! Quiet! Thank you. You already know her name, Joy Jenkins. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a superhero name.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you the following breaking news story.
It seems that the superhero who has been saving lives all over Wattpad has been revealed. And her name is Joy Jenkins! Anyway, this bean was grown in California, the 7th of 10 kids. That sounds familiar. She grew up in a family of artists who had a love of musicals and putting on performances wherever they could. 5 years ago, she moved to Massachusetts with her half of the family to try something new. This sounds oddly familiar too. I wonder why. It was there she finally wrote her first book, got addicted to writing, and hasn't been able to stop. Oh, and she's a songwriter as well. She used to write music with her older sister. A lot of their songs would be story-based. When they decided that music wasn't going to be a career they could achieve, they moved their love of writing to novels. Okay, so to get down and dirty with this book, I'm going to use a school of literary theory to analyze the story. The best way to explain what literary theory is to use the words of the smart people at Purdue University. A very basic way of thinking about literary theory is that these ideas act as different lenses critics use to view and talk about art, literature, and even culture. These different lenses allow critics to consider works of art based on certain assumptions within that school of theory. The different lenses allow critics to focus on particular aspects of a work they consider important. So, the lit theory I will be using for Mr. Right is called psychoanalytic theory. It's very similar to a word you might know, psychoanalysis, which is defined as a system of psychological theory and therapy which aims to treat mental disorders by investigating the interaction of conscious and unconscious elements in the mind and bringing repressed fears and conflicts into the conscious mind by techniques such as dream interpretation and free association. Well, to me that's all a bunch of gobbledygook, so basically literary theory is just different ways of looking at books or literature or anything else. And psychoanalytic theory, the theory that I'm using to analyze Mr. Right, is similar in the sense that it studies either the author or the characters in the book instead of a patient. And psychoanalytic theory mainly focuses on how a character or author has conflict within the conscious and unconscious mind. Having unhealthy baggage and not dealing with it properly causes this conflict. When a person has conflict in their mind, they throw up defenses. For example, people go through denial. And when we are forced to confront our issues, like Elliot will in the book, we get anxiety, like fear of abandonment. Which is why it is a perfect lit theory for this book, because I have it on Joy's good authority that one main theme in the book is fear and facing that fear. Elliot faces fear with her siblings not accepting her and fear over her writing. Cece faces fear over accepting love. Beck faces fear over his writing and whether he can truly be a writer. So now that you know of the main theme in Mr. Right being fear, and that you understand psychoanalytic theory, and what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to take us into the first thing that Joy mentioned when she told me about Elliot's fear. The fear of her siblings not accepting her and the fear of writing. Both of these fears stem from a doubt that permeates her whole being. A doubt of both herself and of what she's capable of. She has low self-esteem, which comes from that category of anxiety produced when we have to confront our issues that I explained previously. But this low self-esteem stems from a traumatic experience that Elliot had before we met her in the book. Her parents had a messy divorce just when she was around high school age. We learn this here and there as she tells Beck the story of her life throughout the book. What caused the divorce was Elliot's father being unfaithful to her mother, which in turn then caused the family to split and take sides. After the divorce, Elliot's half of the family, who sided with her mother, felt like they needed a new start, so they moved to Boston. This caused her to feel isolated in a new place when she was in high school, and so she turned to the only thing she knew, which was writing. And that isolation in the writing led to her being able to publish her first book at 16. This is important because this experience affects Elliot all throughout the book. It causes her self-esteem issues and doubt. According to Dr. Anna Nogales, author of the research study and book Parents Who Cheat: How Children and Adults Are Affected When Their Parents Are Unfaithful, a number of feelings and behaviors are exhibited by children whose parents cheat. Whatever their age, children whose parents have been unfaithful often react with intense feelings of anger, anxiety, guilt, shame, sadness, and confusion. They might act out, regress, or withdraw. They may feel pressured to win back the love of the cheating parent or to become the caretaker of the betrayed parent. The bottom line is that when parents are role models of infidelity, their children can't help but react. Keep this in mind when I go on to talk about how she doubts her writing and herself. Now, in the book, in many places, she wrestles with her doubt, and a lot of the time she tries to figure out what's the cause of it, why does she doubt herself, is it even a good idea to doubt? In the very beginning of the book, she struggles with the question, should she or should she not hire Beck Daniels as her co-author? A lot of it is because she disliked his first impression, then she loved his writing, but also she was a bit intimidated by how well he wrote. In chapter 6, about halfway through the chapter, Cece asks Elliot, well, why don't I just read it to you? Why doth thou feel inferior to thy co-scribe, Beck? Cece asked. Oh shoot, Elliot said, her voice returning to normal. I'm all out of that wisdom right now. Come back Tuesday. Cece rounded the rack and stood beside Elliot. Come on, Elle. What is it about not just this guy, but most college students or other people make you feel less than? Elliot moved away, not looking at Cece. Trick question. Can I phone a friend? Elliot asked. I am your friend. Come on, spill. Water, milk, or juice? Truth in this instance. Elliot met Cece's gaze across the rack and shrugged. I don't know, she said, dropping her gaze and intensely studying a dress, but not seeing it. They know things. They've gone to classes and stuff. They're getting degrees. I have a high school diploma. I don't have a bachelor's in literature. I'm just a girl who got famous from one book I wrote when I was 16. In this passage, Elliot spells out a lot of her doubt and where it stems from, but not the root cause of it. She uses the excuse of not having a college education throughout the book as an excuse for why she doesn't write better. And in the beginning of the passage, before she actually answers Cece's question, she deflects and uses sarcasm as a barrier and a shield because she didn't want to deal with her feelings. Beck confronts this fear multiple times throughout the book. For example, in chapter 16, Beck tells Elliot that she writes well and that she has a strong voice and an excellent writing style, but the stories are meaningless. He says, a story that people would love, he continued, a story that could move people. I've heard enough to know you've been through struggles in your past that could give your writing some substance. Beck motioned to the index card. Not this shallow fluff stuff. This dressing down of her writing, of course, shocks Elliot. Beck goes on to say, look, I'm not saying anything you probably haven't already thought. The few days at the Cape gave me a glimpse into the world you're in. I met the people who are real artists, who have real integrity about their work. They do something meaningful, which is why I believe a part of you wants that. Something pricked at Elliot's chest. A hatred coursed through her veins as his words hit too close to home. For a moment, she felt completely frozen and speechless. His words gripped her and squeezed her so tight she couldn't move. Elliot, I see that you have so much potential to write something worthwhile, but you seem to shy away from it. I do not shy away from it, Elliot snapped, breaking from his words. Yes, you do. I've witnessed you mock your work and put yourself down. I don't understand why you do that, unless you are ashamed of what you do. I'm not ashamed, she said, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. Be that as it may, what I'm trying to say is you have the potential to be a real writer. Why aren't you trying to be one? At this point, Elliot gets upset and ends up leaving the office after angry words are exchanged with Beck. But after this encounter, it encourages and actually causes Elliot to really think about her writing and the deep-set problems that she has. The defenses she puts up include denial of her problems, avoidance of Beck afterwards, and she also displaces her anger and takes it out on Beck in the moment, which all signal that she truly does have a problem with something, at least, that Beck told her. What doesn't help her is that Beck always is analyzing her actions, and he does it subconsciously, probably because he has a concentration not only in literature, but psychology in college. Now that we've talked a little bit about Elliot's fear and doubt in her writing, I'm going to mention how she also has that fear of her family accepting her. In chapter 32, Elliot brings up her insecurity about not going to college to Beck, and he in turn tells her of different writers that hadn't gone to college and had multiple successful books, including Ray Bradbury, Truman Capote, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, and Mark Twain. Beck goes on to tell her, "From where I am, it looks like you found your career without the unnecessary hassle of trying to find it through college. Why don't you accept that for a good thing?" Elliot turned to him, staring him down with a look of condescending annoyance. "Because how can it really be a stable career if I don't have the right knowledge backing it? Elle, you have sold millions of books. When does that start meaning something to you?" "When it means something to my family!" Elliot's face went stiff with shock, her eyes wide. Beck frowned in confusion. "Tristan and Cece support you." Understanding filled his eyes. "Oh, you don't mean them." He shifted, dropping his gaze. "You're talking about your other family members." A look of deep sadness entered Elliot's eyes, and her expression fell. She sank onto the floor, staring at her clasped hands. Beck settled down beside her, their shoulders touching. They sat there in silence, Elliot's words still ringing in their ears. "I'm a joke to them," she said, her voice hollow. She stared at the opposite bookshelf, her hands fidgeting with each other. "Kyle sent me a picture of my first book when he saw it in the store. He made some joke about how the author had my name." Elliot swallowed hard. "I didn't even admit it was my book. I was embarrassed to admit it. When my second book came out, they of course knew it was me by then." She let out a sigh. Her eyes glazed over, as if in her mind she was reliving the moment. "I got a text saying he was so proud I had written another book, even with my lack of education. They went to college and have successful careers. In their mind, my success doesn't really count. It's a fluke." This is one of the root problems of her fear and her doubt. She wants so badly for her siblings and her father to acknowledge that she did something. Even when she does end up going to the wedding towards the end of the book, she cares too much about what her brothers are saying and what her sister does and what her father and his new wife say. And she gets hurt by it. What does help her, though, is Beck and his constant companionship and how he helps her realize that she doesn't need her family's support. He lets her know that it's nice to have it, but she doesn't need it. But nobody's perfect, and in the book, Beck also has fears of his own that he has to confront. And Elliot helps him confront those. Throughout the book, Beck has trouble admitting to his family, his father and his brother, mainly. His mother knows that he is writing the book, but that he is writing with Elliot. The few times Elliot met Grant, and the one time she met his father, it wasn't mentioned, and Elliot was explained off as just a friend. In chapter 24, it starts out with Elliot trying to get Beck to admit to why he won't tell his family that he's writing. Here we go. Interesting, Elliot said. You can poke holes at my life, but I'm not allowed to do the same. Beck looked at her. I apologize for doing that, but this is not something I'm discussing with you. Is that because I'm the source of your aversion to telling your brother about this book? No, just leave it. Elliot crossed her arms. Like you left my life alone? I'm serious. Elliot tossed up her hands. Come on, it can't be that big of a deal, she said. You're simply writing a book. Where could be the harm in any of that? Beck rubbed his face, trying to push away his emotions. I mean, it's not the next great American novel, but it's not bad, she said. She looked at him with her head cocked. Is that why you won't tell him? Because you should be writing the next Grapes of Wrath? Beck dropped his hands away and stared at the table. No, he said angrily. It's because if I told him I wanted to be a writer, he would never take me seriously. So, Beck is a character that doesn't like sharing his feelings. Oftentimes, he observes and helps others. He's very introverted, but Elliot seems to get under his skin. Especially when she doesn't leave things alone. Beck's low self-esteem problem doesn't stem from any type of familial problems that he had in the past. It stems from an idea that took root in his mind that he was told. This passage in chapter 14 explains exactly what that is. It says, Beck looked at Elliot, his usually impassive features displaying puzzlement. What? Elliot asked. It doesn't make sense, he said. Oh, that's because you're trying to listen to everything at once. Pick one conversation to listen to and stick with it. It doesn't make sense any other way. No, I mean, everyone living off of their art. Elliot gave him a funny look. The proof that they are is before you. But that's not how normal life works. You get a stable job and possibly do things on the side. You never bank everything on your art. Don't say that too loud or we might all stop existing. Beck just looked at her, his face reverting to its normal, emotionless state. Beck, I'm not saying it's the easiest path in life, Elliot said. Heck, there are so many other easy things we could have done, but it's worth it. Don't you agree? Beck said nothing, his silence holding all of his opinions. Are you saying people shouldn't believe in their art? Elliot asked. I'm just saying normal life doesn't work that way. Then what are we then? Beck was silent, and Elliot could feel a wall falling down between them. For a long, tense moment, they looked at each other. So, Beck believes that he can't make it as a writer because it's not normal. It's not the way that he was told he could do it. And even afterwards, when Elliot is talking to her mother touches on the fact that it's good for Beck to be around people who are successful in their art and have put all of their effort into that art. It will make Beck think about the assumptions he has accepted as truth. And he does end up doing that, and it does end up helping him by the end of the book overcome the fear of being a writer, and he does end up publishing his own book. So now that we have touched on the heavy subjects, I am going to move on to a subplot of Mr. Right. Now, throughout the whole book, there is this running betting game. I know, stay with me. But apparently, Elliot and her family are obsessed with betting. They bet on little things like, in the beginning, how long Beck lasts at their family dinner. And as you'll see in this passage, can Milo get Cece to believe something about a certain book? Let's dive in. Sunlight filled the street and bounced off the small umbrellas that hung over the metal tables. Elliot steered her way towards a shaded chair and flopped down. Milo made no sign that he noticed her. Elliot cocked her head, reading the title of the book he was holding. She watched him, smiling as he grimaced every few seconds. She coughed. Milo hit her on the head with the book and went on reading. "Doing some cheap reading, huh?" Elliot said. "Is there a reason you are devoting time to Under the Moonlight Bridge?" "It's Cece's favorite book," Milo replied, still not lowering the book. Elliot smirked and leaned on the table. "Did she tell you that?" she asked. "Yes." Was she also laughing maniacally and tapping her fingers together? "Yes, but she does that a lot around me, so I wasn't alarmed." "Milo, why do you think Cece told you that that was her favorite book?" Milo slowly lowered the book, giving Elliot a wary look. "She wants to reenact the scene from chapter 5 with me." "Not likely." Milo tossed the book on the table. "It's not her favorite book," he said evenly. "We've often referred to that book as the trash that should have been thrown out a year ago." "That little minx." "Sure, that's the word for her. Pride and Prejudice is her favorite book." "Why say this was?" "I bet her $25 she couldn't get you to read it," Elliot said, giving him a wide grin. "I bet you $30 you can't convince her it's really a novel dealing with the struggles of poverty and the oppression in the North." Milo gave her a long, hard look. "Do you realize that your family has a gambling problem?" he asked. "Sure we do," Elliot said. "We have a bet going about how long it will be before we have to go to a meeting to deal with it. I'm optimistic that we can keep it under control for another 2 years. Cece says 6 months, depending on how fast our mother adds to the problem with her own bets. Tristan is the true optimist. He says we would have to carry him in his casket." "Well," Milo said, "as long as you're aware of it." "We are. So what do you say? Do we have a bet?" Milo hesitated. "Has Cece actually read the book?" he asked. "Gosh, no." Milo held out his hand and Elliot shook it. These gambling rings and bets that exchange hands throughout the whole book provide amusement for the audience. One of my favorite sections is when, due to the betting, money exchanges hands in a complete circle and returns back to the person who originally gave the money. And of course this made me wonder why Elliot and her family love gambling so much. So I did a little bit searching on the internet and I found an article from the University of Cambridge about the psychology of gambling. And here's a few facts. If you didn't know already, gambling can become a form of addiction for some people. Maybe that's what Elliot has, maybe not. Maybe they just love doing it because it's fun. But gambling games promote an illusion of control, the belief that the gambler can exert skill over an outcome that is actually defined by chance. Dr. Luke Clark. Maybe Elliot and her family need some kind of control in their lives because of how uncontrolled their life was before, during the divorce. The illusion of control can be comforting when you feel like everything else in your life is not in your control. In addition to an array of psychological factors, problem gambling may also have some important biological determinants. The brain chemical dopamine is known to play a key role in drug addiction and may also be abnormally regulated in problem gambling. So, basically, I think what this is trying to say in smart people speak is that gambling releases dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical, and that causes people to end up becoming addicted to that kind of thing, because anything that releases dopamine can become addicting. So while also having that illusion of control, Elliot and her family could also be reaffirming their addiction because it feels good. So, the last person that Joy mentioned who has trouble overcoming fear is Cece. Cece Mackenzie, Elliot's crazy writer sister, who Elliot loves and has very amusing interactions with during the whole book. Cece has trouble with facing the fact that Milo, Elliot and Cece's best friend, loves her. They joke about it, they flirt, but Cece never really takes him seriously. As the book continues on, Milo seems okay with this until we get to his birthday, towards the middle of the book, when he starts ignoring Cece and becoming moody. Of course, Cece has no idea why, because how could she, you know? And during his birthday party, Cece corners Milo, and they finally have it out with each other. The passage starts towards the end of chapter 22. Cece starts by asking Milo a question. Milo, what is going on? What did I do? Nothing. Okay, then what is the problem? That is the problem. That I did nothing is the problem? Exactly. That is exactly what the problem is. You did nothing. If I did nothing, then why are you mad at me? Milo growled, his fist clenching. How do you not get it? He asked. How do you not understand that you did nothing and that's why I'm done? Done with it all. Cece stared at Milo with wide eyes. You're crazy. Nothing you said made any sense, she said. I'm crazy? Milo said, his face getting more and more animated with each syllable. What's crazy is that I ever liked you. That I was an idiot and waited. That's what's crazy. But guess what, Cece? I'm done with all of it. Cece made a face. That is what this is about? She said. Is that why you haven't been talking to me the last few days? Milo's face flushed with anger. Beck leaned over to Elliot. Should we intervene? He asked. Sure, she said. If you don't feel like keeping your head and limbs attached to your body. Beck nodded. How do you not see that this is what this has always been about? Milo said, his voice raising. What do you want me to say, Milo? Milo flung his arms out to the side, pulling the contents of his drink. I don't know anymore. I don't care. About liking me or about being my friend? Both. Either. Neither. I don't know. Just know for once, Cece, I'm tired of the games and your constant flirtation that goes nowhere. I want someone who makes sense. This passage kind of brings everything to a head and makes Cece realize what she's actually doing to Milo by not acknowledging his love for her. What's interesting about this passage is it starts out with a question, what did I do? Which is often a question we see as consumers that comes from not a female character, but a male character, when a female is upset with him. This gender reversal makes this much more interesting, because we often don't see that females can be just as oblivious as males. As well as Milo being a little bit dramatic, but valid in his emotional response. And then Cece's obtuseness shows when she doesn't understand what Milo's trying to tell her. That he loves her so much, but he can't continue loving her without it being requited love. I'll also point out that in the middle of this whole debacle, as it is dubbed in the book, Elliot and Beck are an audience to Milo and Cece's fight. And Beck even asks Elliot whether or not he should intervene, because the argument was getting a little too heated. But Elliot, seeing this as both necessary but comical, tells him that he shouldn't if he wants to keep his head and limbs attached. But why would Elliot see this more comically than seriously? Maybe it's because she thinks this was long coming. Or maybe she has the same problems that Cece is dealing with. I don't know. In the next chapter, chapter 23, Cece talks to Elliot about how she finds it hard to admit to herself and Milo that she cares about him. But at the beginning of the chapter, Elliot reveals something to us that is key to understanding how Cece has reacted to Milo's explosion of emotion. She says, after Beck asks her if she wants to talk about what happened between Cece and Milo, that there's nothing to talk about, she said. Cece has locked herself in a room for the last 4 days writing, and Milo has been peevish to the point that girls no longer flirt with him. What's wrong with Cece writing? Cece writes for 2 reasons. 1, when she gets inspired. 2, when she's avoiding something. So there is another example of the defense mechanism that comes with the psychoanalytic analyzation. Now, Cece's stubbornness in regards to admitting her feelings for Milo stem from the same issues that Elliot had. How the familial issues that she had with her father and her family caused her strife. Specifically, caused her to have a fear of intimacy and a fear of abandonment, as you'll see in this passage. Elliot finds Cece at 3 a.m. in the kitchen, and Elliot sits down to have a cup of tea with her. "Are we royally screwed up?" she asked. Elliot took a sip of her lukewarm tea and shrugged. "Given our track record and our relation to the Queen, I would say yes." Cece made no reply, her eyes still holding a lost look. "Jokes aside, are we screwed up? I sometimes wonder if we're damaged beyond repair," she said, her voice quiet. "Everything can be fixed," Elliot said. "Not us. Not our family. We moved across the country just to get away from them. It was for a fresh start." Cece turned to Elliot, her features expressing her troubled thoughts. "Really?" she asked. "Or were we too scared to try and make it in the place that caused us so much pain?" Cece turned away, finding it easier to voice her thoughts to the empty space. "For people who say they won the divorce game, I feel like we're the ones that lost so much more than the other half." Elliot stared down at the table, Cece's words hitting too close to home. Cece looked at her, a pained look in her eyes. Why do we still feel the effects of what happened years ago? She asked. Why do they get to move on? When do we get to move on? Her voice lowered to barely above a whisper. When does it stop hurting and affecting how we live our lives? I don't know, Elliot said. I'm still waiting for that day. Elliot goes on to try and convince Cece that Milo isn't their father and he wouldn't abandon her. But the chapter ends before we really see whether or not Cece believes her. Before the conversation Elliot had with Cece, Elliot had talked to Beck about the explosion that Milo had. And what was interesting about this part of the book was that for the first time, really, there was a disagreement between Beck and Elliot. Elliot couldn't necessarily see Milo's side, and Beck couldn't necessarily see Cece's side, and it became heated. Here, you see for yourself. Elliot and Beck have been going back and forth between why the other should understand either Milo or Cece. Specifically for Beck, he doesn't understand why Cece would be putting Milo off, and he believes that she's at fault. I get that everyone is scared, but you get over it. You face your fears. This isn't that easy to get over. You seriously don't understand what you are saying. Elliot crossed her arms and turned away from Beck. Then help me understand, he said. What could she possibly be scared about that is worth giving up her chance of being with Milo? Elliot spun towards him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She's scared of being hurt and abandoned, just like she was by our father. This is the point where we learn about her father having affairs outside of the marriage, which is why Cece has a fear of intimacy and a fear of abandonment. But, good news, Cece and Milo end up working it out, and in the end of the book, as I mentioned previously, they elope. They end up marrying. The last section in the book I want to talk about is another underlying subplot that I believe is very interesting. And it's about the book that Beck and Elliot are writing together. They're writing a book with dual points of view, the main characters in that book being Tess and Weston. Well, since they've begun, Beck encouraged Elliot to write from what she knew. But what actually happens is, because they write from what they know, their characters end up being reflections of themselves. At least from what you can infer from what we know about the characters, Weston ends up kind of like Beck, and Tess ends up kind of like Elliot. For example, we hear about Weston and Tess getting along right when Elliot and Beck start to get along as co-writers towards the beginning of the book. And oftentimes when they talk about their characters, they're talking about issues that they are dealing with as well. Here's an example. In chapter 40, this is around the time when Elliot is kind of realizing she has feelings for Beck, and they're really solid in their friendship. And she thinks, why not ask Beck this question? Do you think Tess and Weston will make it? She asked. He cocked his head, amused and puzzled by the question. What do you mean? At the end of the book, they get together, he said. Yes, but What about after the last chapter? After we no longer follow their story? What about then? When they both go back to their normal lives and summer is over? Do they make it? Does he find time in his busy life to see her? Would they even last with their different personalities? She shrugged like the answer wasn't important, and neither had the question been. She stared down at the couch, playing with the end of the cushion. Beck looked at her with a serious expression. "Yes," he said. "I think they would." She looked up at him. "It would be hard, but what relationship isn't?" Elliot gave a solemn nod. "That's good to know. I always wondered." He smiled. "Me too. I mean, the real question lies with Tess." She frowned. Could she really put up with a guy like Weston, who is a cocky know-it-all? "What about Tess?" she asked. "She's kind of crazy at times. Can Weston really put up with that?" He shrugged. "I think he could. He's more durable than he looks." "Well, if that's the case, then Tess can definitely endure Weston's cocky know-it-all personality." Beck smiled and nodded, looking away. "Good to know." So from what I've told you, we know that Beck is a cocky know-it-all, but also introverted. We also know that he can be sarcastic at times, enough to endure Elliot's crazy personality, who is also very sarcastic. In the end of the book, Elliot and Beck get together and end up getting married. There are some correlations between that and Tess and Weston. At least I would say so. But what's so interesting about how Joy has written this is that I'm pretty sure Elliot and Beck don't realize that they're talking about themselves. Except for maybe a little bit until this point. Because previously, it was just, how could we end up getting from point A to point B? Well, they wrote from what they knew. They knew that at the very beginning, they disliked each other, Elliot being more intense in her dislike than Beck, and how they ended up making it a friendship, and in the end, a romance. So, inevitably, they would have written a book that was very similar to their experience. And after this conversation, Elliot finds the courage to ask Beck to be her +1 to her sister's wedding, hopeful that he would say yes. Well, he doesn't. He makes an excuse saying that it's non-professional and that he couldn't do that while they were still writing the book. So Elliot ends up leaving for the wedding alone. Well, what we don't know is during the time that Elliot is in California, Beck is rushing to finish the book, so he doesn't have an excuse not to go to Elliot. He ends up finishing his side of the book, and he goes with Tristan and rides in to save Elliot from the sarcastic remarks that her brothers are making. He also survives the sarcastic remarks her brothers make about him, which also proves to her that he's got what it takes to really let him in. And now it's time for fun facts from an interview with Joy Jenkins, with our special guest, Sunaina Kabadkar as Joy Jenkins. So, Joy, what inspired you to write Mr. Right?
Well, Sunaina, I've never written dual points of view because I believe guys think so differently than girls that I wouldn't be able to make it realistic. So, that spurred the thought of, well, what if a famous writer wanted to do both points of view and decided to hire a male writer? What would that be like? what would that male writer be like? It snowballed from there.
Interesting. So, why does the book surround Elliot?
It surrounds Elliot because she's the one character that needs to grow, needs to expand from what she had written to what she could be writing.
That makes sense. But what was behind your name choice for the characters?
Elliot was actually suggested by my sister. I have a love of using guy names for girls because they have a stronger sound to them. Cece is inspired by my sister, Grace. I call her Gracie Face, so Cece came from Gracie. Tristan is based off my older brother, Kevin. Tristan was stolen from my older brother's love of telling stories about him and his two friends. They were called Kevin, Tristan, and Noah stories. Beck was simply a name I liked, and it worked that it was also half of Steinbeck.
Nice. Is there anything else that you would like me to know about you that would give me and my audience a better sense of who you are?
For me, you should know that writing isn't a hobby. It's my life. I don't dream about making it a career. I will. I will do everything I can to make it a reality. Also, I write because I believe the world needs more strong female characters that don't trip over nothing, swoon because a guy looks their way, or can't stand up for themselves. I want to write about characters that, even though they are flawed, have a strength to them. A strength that can inspire someone else to be stronger or stand taller.
That's so inspiring. I can't believe you're so strong in your identity as an author. Anyway, is there anything else you'd want us to know about the book?
Oh, random fact about Mr. Right is that it completely surprised me that it turned out funny. I can't tell a joke to save my life, but I can write one. That was not something that I had planned on.
Well, thank you for joining me today. It was nice talking to you.
It was nice talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Quotes taken from outside sources are from thetwoofus.org, The Impact of Adult Infidelity on Children, and the University of Cambridge, The Psychology of Gambling. I'm Sunaina Kabadkar, and here are my favorite quotes from the book. The bridal party sat in a sectioned-off area filled with plush, half-moon couches and a low glass table at the center. The top was decorated with glasses in varying stages of emptiness or fullness, depending on how one saw life. Well, she said, you know what they say. Great minds process the universe on parallel wavelengths. He chuckled. That's what I was going to say. Elliot cocked her head and gave him a teasing smile. What am I thinking now? She asked. Beck studied her face, his thoughts seeming to get lost in her eyes for a moment. You're wondering how many calamities would befall this earth if a pig actually did fly. You know me so well. Is murder legal anywhere? She asked. Without looking up, Cece answered. No, she said. I've checked. Pity. We should both quit being writers and find other careers. Naturally, Beck said, his expression hinting at amusement. You will become a psychologist. I will grow a beard, buy a monkey, and play the barrel organ on the sidewalk. That doesn't seem plausible. Elliot raised her eyebrows. Why? Because I can't play the barrel organ? Because monkeys are difficult to buy. You've been listening to the Wattpad Tea. Have a great day and happy hunting, Wattpadders.